should be topic number one tonight is why we have to be careful in ignoring the distinctions between capitalism versus commerce. This, of course, came with a link. Let's go to it. Takes us to a Kamji verse. I'm supposed to interview this brother too, and I just kind of fell behind recently, but I'll get to it soon. We'll watch the video and then we'll discuss.
I want to take this time to go over some of my stances on capitalism and why I think the African mode of production is superior. In my recent video, I stated that capitalism should absolutely not be idealized by African people when it comes to the implementation of economics in our reality. Now, most of the time when you see someone mixing a capitalist effort with save the race language, they're a scammer. And we don't have to go deep into miscreants like the hidden hairline and the fecal brain assimilationists to prove this. What exactly do I mean when I say capitalism should not be idealized over our own economic structures? Well, let's get into the specific definition of capitalism. Capitalism is private control of the means of production by an ownership class for profit. Capitalism is not the same thing as commerce. Commerce, or the exchange of goods and services, has existed since the beginning of human cultures. Feudalism, the slave mode of production, the tributary mode of production, and the African mode of production all have commerce. Capitalist commerce is specifically that which is primarily controlled and directed by the owners of industry for profit. Though modern neoliberal theorists champion the role of a completely free and unfettered market, Adam Smith, the grandfather of capitalism, stood against rent-seeking and envisioned the state as a primary role in the structuring and procurement of a nation's wealth and income. Capitalism is also not the same as businesses or currencies, since all economic systems have both units of production and mediums of exchange. Oftentimes, those who support capitalism try to associate it with universal features seen in all economies, and this is absolutely not valid. This gets into a lot of the confusing Western terminologies, because Adam Smith, who is one of the major founders of capitalist thought, was considered a classical liberal. And in the modern Western political economy, conservatives, who are much closer to classical liberalism when it comes to economics, are juxtaposed against liberals who are progressive and trend towards the economic left. Both of these Western traditions in the political right and the political left are two sides of the same coin. Charles Mills, in his text Racial Contract, documents how the founding ideologues of liberalism completely excluded Black people from their conception of human beings being deserving of unalienable rights. This stance still exists today in conventional politics, where left-leaning parties and right-leaning parties use Black voters as pawns in their political game of chess. In the American context, both major parties receive capital funding from billionaires, whether it's Sheldon Adelson on the right or George Soros on the left. And this goes back to my previous point. Capitalism is absolutely not meant to benefit everybody. It is meant to benefit the ownership class and requires a large amount of poor workers who do the job of the owners. Capitalism creates a minority of rich people and a majority of poor people. This is an objective historical fact. There has never been a time in history where capitalism has benefited everybody because it was never meant to. It has always been meant for the winners. Now that brings us to my next point. Can Black people be capitalists? Yes and no, and I will explain why. It is obvious that Black people in the modern global economy own capital and industries. There are numerous examples of this. Black billionaires from Michael Jordan to Aliko Dangote validate this fact. However, from a historical perspective, capitalism as a social formation that is an through mercantilism was built upon a desire of Europeans to enforce their colonial regimes on a planetary scale. The work of great scholars such as John Henry Clark and Dr. Eric Williams have revealed how the international enslavement of the modern world. At the onset of capitalism, the most valuable commodities were enslaved Africans. One could argue that the entrepreneurial efforts of men like Tipu Tip and women like Madame Tinubu in taking advantage of the demand for labor by European colonies and building massive amounts of wealth for themselves represent the most pristine emanations of black capitalism in the modern world. Some of their descendants today still benefit from the wealth they earned from collaborating with imperialist powers. This leads me to my next point. Can we honestly criticize entrepreneurs like Madame Tinubu and Tipu Tip for taking advantage of an ever-growing market when their endeavors laid the framework for a modern economy that produced the likes of billionaires, black billionaires like Byron Allen and Jay-Z? These men are celebrated by black people for their entrepreneurial success in defying the odds in a racist society. My position is that it is completely hypocritical to castigate African slave traders while celebrating the economic success of modern black capitalists who benefited from the historical processes that they established in helping develop nations like the United States, the most successful capitalist nation in the world. Without the collaboration of African slave traders, there would be no United States. If the goal is to accept the capitalist system as it is, we should accept everything else that comes with it, in the good, bad, and the ugly. If capitalism is universal and meant to last forever in perpetuity, then maybe it is the case that black middle class and the black working class are meant to serve the wealth-building objectives of the black elite. Yes, it is true that capitalism has pulled more people out of poverty if we consider African societies and civilizations as universally poor in comparison to those in Europe. This is especially the case if one considers the development of the Western world at the expense of African territorial states who opposed their imperial expansion for centuries. If we completely ignore the fact that Africa had its own indigenous systems of wealth building and commerce prior to the slave trade, and that the economic warfare perpetuated by European states that led to the mass genocide of African people, along with the long-rooted connections of Max Weber's Protestant ethic in the Faustian effort by Europeans to colonize the world, then it is absolutely true that capitalism has pulled more people out of poverty than any other economic system. However, if we examine the true nature of the African mode of production, we find examples of wealth building that far exceeded the capacity of modern capitalist economies. Mansa Musa, who is known as the richest man of all time, was a byproduct of the Malian variant of the AMP. According to the research of Dr. Chirukuri, large economies and immense wealth was built by African societies through long-distance intra-African trade that passed through riverine and lacustrine systems. This completely refutes the erroneous claims by Dr. Thomas Sowell, rooted in the baseless proposition of geographic determinism that implies that pre-colonial Africa was underdeveloped due to the lack of navigable rivers. If this was the case, there would be no such thing as civilizations like Ouagadougou, Songhai, or Oyo. Now let's compare and contrast the AMP and capitalism based upon some basic elements that we can observe. In African economies, public wealth reserves were mandatory. There were enforced market obligations to maintain cultural ties between different populations. Products were a reflection of personal character and required to be made with perfected quality. Customers were to be found among the trustworthy, with an obligation on vendors to satisfy the needs of the customer. And finally, labor was pulled together to ensure the economic productivity of all sectors of the economy. On the flip side, in free market capitalism, there are no wealth reserves, no obligation to maintain cultural ties, and the weight of determining what product is good or bad ultimately falls on the consumer. Cultural trust has little to no impact on who can sell to who, and the productive process is controlled privately and directed via profit interest. Now, some could argue that the protectivist nature of African economies at the macro and micro level led to their ultimate destruction by Europeans during slavery. This would not be accurate due to the fact that vestiges of the African mode of production exist in modern Africa from the continent and also in the diaspora, from the Jangi structure of the Bamileke of West Cameroon to the Quilombos of Brazil, and even the unitary state of Henri Christophe in Haiti. Dr. Amos Wilson viewed the Jangi system of West Cameroon as something that African people all over the world could emulate due to its nature as an analog to a rotating savings and credit association and generalized labor institution. The Jangi helped the Bamileke compete head-to-head against French imperialists economically during the colonial period and played a very prominent role in financing the Cameroonian Liberation War. Dr. Amos Wilson saw that traditional African financial approaches like the Jangwi must be applied to our modern economic reality in order to advance Black societies. According to Dr. Amos Wilson, Black people do not suffer from a lack of money, but from the absence of an African-centered economic system. Money is not a system. It is what it is. A system involves the systematic and organized utilization and distribution of money. Without the pattern, system, or organization, one does not have an economy. An economy exists prior to money, and there were economies in the world prior to the invention of money. Dr. Amos Wilson continues, there is not a Black bank in existence. Anytime you have a bank regulated by another race of people and by the rules of another race, it is not yours. You are just there. I can show you where the presence of Black banks has retarded Black economic development. Other groups move into economic existence and control before they build a bank. After they build an economic base, then you'll see them build a bank, and not the other way around. Only dominated people who don't know themselves do things backwards. In Wilson's view, African-centered economic councils on the local, statewide, national, and international level could be utilized to manage all economic interactions through communitarian, retail, and service outlets. Also, distribution centers, a raw materials development center, and financial sector, as well as an import and export sector to connect the continent to the diaspora, could be managed by these councils. The power of such development can be exemplified if one analyzes the evolutionary trajectory of Black businesses in the United States from mutual aid societies and then evolving into cooperative insurance institutions and finally businesses. The UNIA is the most famous example of an institution based upon horizontally managed auxiliaries that mirror the fundamental unit of production in African societies. Dr. Lloyd Hogan's analysis of diasporic African motor production economies emphasizes social production as opposed to profit. He defines a political economy as human populations undergoing social reproduction within a bounded geographical domain under rules enforced by a political state. People are the central focus, and their labor drives the political economic system. 6 parameters of political economic analysis include geographic space, human population, institutional mechanisms of social reproduction, historical period, political state, and external geographical domains. Social reproduction requires the creation and maintenance of the population through institutional mechanisms. Human labor consists of 2 alternating phases: external labor, which creates the material means of survival, and internal labor, which generates human energy and the reproduction of the population itself. Distributive mechanisms ensure the flow of human energy from internal labor to external labor and the distribution of material goods in the opposite direction. Accumulated wealth, characteristic of the historical epoch, serves as the switching mechanism to restart the cycle of labor and maintain the political economy. Hogan's research reveals the necessity of maintaining a universal safety net, or what the Garveyites envisioned as a racial trust grounded in the creation of a Black laboring population, aligned with the principle of human perfectibility, or everyone striving to do the best and be the best for the collective at large. In the pursuit of economic empowerment and liberation, African-centered economies are a viable alternative to the dominant capitalist system. Through the African mode of production, African people can reclaim cultural identity by emphasizing communal cooperation and interdependence to empower individuals and promote self-determination. African-centered economies prioritize intelligent resource management and challenge the narrow definition of success and prosperity in the Western world. By embracing these principles, Black communities can redefine economic success and foster global African solidarity. Ultimately, the African mode of production offers a legitimate pathway for Black empowerment rooted in heritage, community, and sustainable prosperity.
So that's the Brother Camja verse. I noticed it was lagging when I was watching via StreamYard, but when I was watching on YouTube, wasn't lagging. It's an interesting thing. What I'll try to do is I'll try to play it via another browser. It could be that this browser doesn't support StreamYard as well. This is the Edge browser that I'm using, so I'm just making a mental note of that. A couple people came through. Jonelle says good evening. Daily Affirmations by Pauline says good evening. Brother Bakari is here saying peace and black power. Yeah, Bakari, sorry about last week, but I cut the show in half, and you came on right when we was ending, so I apologize for that. Before I throw it to the panel, I'll quickly say that I'm noticing more and more that our folks in particular is defining capitalism as exploitation, full stop. And so I'm noticing there's a hint of it from Camgiverse here in this video as well. I mean, he goes on to elaborate more, but there's a hint of the idea, the notion of when you say capitalism, when you say someone's a capitalist, they are an exploiter. And I think that's what folks are not jiving well with. I'll be curious to hear what Oni and Buana has to say to it. Let me start with Oni. Oni, what are your thoughts on what you just saw just now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the audio was a little bit off, I guess, but from what I got, well, there's four things I wrote. One, of course, was Mansa Musa had slaves. You know what I mean? So I don't know if Mansa Musa is the praiseworthy for an example of a non-exploitative system. Not everybody was rich under Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was rich solely. Either way, I think Comgiverse pointed out that Adam Smith was talking about using the state for the benefit of the people. So it's not like, so I think what you're saying about capitalism necessarily being exploitative is not really the case. I don't think the dichotomy between socialism and capitalism is one is exploitative and the other one isn't. I think that's socialist rhetoric. I think that's what Marx and them say. But I think the reason why they're saying it is not really related to reality as much as fantasy, as to say that they believe that the state or that the state became so advanced or so profitable that it could benefit everybody, but not to say that there was an economic system that benefited everybody. Now, obviously, there are, Comgiverse mentions that this economy is meant for the winners as opposed to the losers, which is like, that's just the real world. The question of it benefiting everybody, I mean, I would love for everybody to be benefited, but we have to come to terms with the reality that, one, your individual actions are going to benefit mostly the people within your circle. Two, you do want other people outside of your circle to benefit. And like Conjiverse points out, Adam Smith said, yeah, you want public education, you want public roads, you want so on and so forth. You want, the profits of particularly beneficial individuals to go towards public infrastructure. That's without a doubt. Now, obviously, there's a contrast between, let's say, imperialism and colonialism and then capitalism. Now, what happens is that if you go into the socialist rhetoric, you'll have Lenin telling you, no, imperialism is the last stage of capitalism. You'll have Kwame Nkrumah telling you, no, neocolonialism is the last stage of capitalism. So what happens is that if you take that as a doctrine, if you say, hey, look, Lenin is right, Nkrumah is right, and Adam Smith is wrong, right? If you take that as a doctrine, then sure, if you're saying capitalism means imperialism, or even you're saying capitalism means Europe imperializing Africa, then obviously nobody's advocating for that, right? If you're saying that capitalism is Europe neo-colonializing Africa, nobody's advocating for that. But when people like, let's say, I'm gonna use Buana here, right? But when people like Buana or I, or even Brother Bakari, when we're talking about capitalism, we're just talking about people starting businesses, and yes, the profit goes to the person who starts the business because they invested into the business. And as far as the concern of, hey, well, look, the worker is not getting paid as much, so on and so forth. I'll say this: once upon a time, I was, interested in socialists. One of the smartest socialists I've come across, as a white boy, Not saying obviously, but it was a white boy. And the white boy said, and I put it in my book Zubiri, quote inside of my book Zubiri, where he says the capitalist pays you just enough for you to come into work tomorrow. Okay, he pays you just enough for you to come into work tomorrow. So what does that mean, right? That means that I want to start a restaurant in Tanzania, right? Let's just pretend I just saw some hot dog recipes on Twitter, and it was interesting, right? I want to start a hot dog business, whatever, right? I have to buy hot dogs. I have to buy a restaurant. I have to pay workers and so on and so forth, right? Now check this out. Let's say I have to buy the space for the restaurant. It's going to cost me, let's say $1,000, right? It's not that much, but it's not that little, right? It's going to cost me $1,000, right? So I do that, right? $1,000 is not a lot of money for some of you, right? Now let's say I have the workers and they're selling hot dogs, right? And I then pay them $1,000 a month, right? Because you guys say $1,000 is not that much, right? They are not going to show up to work tomorrow. They're going to open up their own restaurant. Okay. Now, when they open up their own restaurant, I'm not going to have a restaurant. That's one. Number two, if I give them each $1,000 each, right? And the restaurant costs me $1,000, whatever, right? I can't even afford that. So let's say I have 4 workers, right? I'm paying now $4,000. This restaurant in Tanzania is not generating $4,000 or $5,000, not including the fact that I have to do rent, not including the fact that I have to do this, not including any of that stuff. So I have to pay them in proportion to 1, how much money is generated, 2, how much money, how much it costs me to rent the place, and 3, how much I can get for a profit. Because the thing that happens is this: when you have an employee, right, they are the first people to profit from your business. The employee and your customers are the first people to profit from your business. The owner profits last. The reason why the owner gets the most amount of profit is because they are in debt to the business from jump. Because like I said, I start off putting $1,000 in, right? And I'm not just saying it's just $1,000. What I'm saying is that I start off putting $1,000. None of the workers put any money into the business. Now, I do say, hey, look, in exchange for your labor, I will pay you, right, out of my pocket. And then you will sell some goods, and then that money will come back in. And that money, if it's enough, will pay you as well. But it will also pay me for the money I already invested. And it will take this business earning over $1,000, not including how much I'm paying you guys, right? It take this business over $1,000 to get me any profit. And so it comes back to, in fact, this conversation that was on Twitter where this guy said, relationships like a business. Whatever. Shut up, dude. What I pointed out was this: 70% of businesses fail within the first 7 years, or within the first 9 years, within the first decade. 70% fail. So in reality, most businesses fail within the first 7 years. Okay? And by fail, it means that whoever invested inside of this new business, they just lost all their fucking money. I don't mean to curse, but they just lost all their money. Right? So why I'm pointing this out is to say that this economic system, this quote unquote exploitation, sure, on a large scale, on a scale of nations getting involved, on a scale of America or travelers from Europe going into Tanzania and fucking shit up. Sorry, I'm gonna stop cursing. Or messing things up. That of course you can say that's exploitation, but you again have to understand they like what else are they supposed to be doing there? If I go to Africa, right, and I already have $1,000, let's say, right? It's not about the money. Okay, I'm not bragging, right? I'm just saying I already have $1,000, right? I'm not going to put $1,000 just to pay everybody else. I'm going to put down $1,000 so that I can make $10,000, hopefully, or at least $1,000 back. But when I do that, I am benefiting my workers and I'm benefiting my customers. You know, because if it were not a benefit, then they wouldn't even work for me. So I think that the system, and it's like, yeah, am I supposed to, is it designed for me to win? Absolutely. Because why else would I be putting my $1,000 into that enterprise when I could put it into another enterprise? You know, there has to be some sort of incentive. And I think that's what's lost in the conversation, because, you know, we're talking about, like I think that's what's lost in the conversation. And so the one image I could have gathered was the one of Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa is exchanging salt or something with the Middle East or what have you, but he owns a innumerable amount of slaves. You know, like an innumerable amount of slaves. So it's just like realistically, we have to, you know, I think that's what's missing from the dialogue, in the sense of, yeah, if you're saying capitalism is this, you know, basically Europeans exploiting Africans, obviously I'm not for that. But if you recognize that when somebody's talking about capitalism, they're saying, hey, I'm going to engage in I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to try to give more African people more jobs, because that's what they're asking me for. They're saying, hey, can I get a job? Can I get a job? I need a job. I need some work. I need a job. I'm trying to give them jobs, right? If that's a problem, right? Like then go and say, hey, look, giving black people jobs is a problem. But I've never heard anybody say that, and I'll just leave it at that.
Let me also say, jobs that they didn't have before you actually came into the nation itself, before you actually took the risk, before you actually made the investment. That needs to be stated. Now, and I like Cam Verse. I actually like him. Me personally, I think he's a little bit too smart for YouTube. You know, like a lot of brothers, I think Goni's too smart for YouTube. But I think that he does have something to say, you know, and I wouldn't easily dismiss it. I respect the fact that he made a distinction between capitalism and commercialism, or commerce, you know, or how we describe it as commerce. But see, my problem in his analysis is that he comes from the perspective of this perfect black state, this black state that takes care of them people, takes care of the people, and where the people are comfortable to see a benefit, and the state itself is progressive. I live in a black country. The state that I live in, I believe, has failed its people. Yeah, and many so-called Commonwealth countries, you know, with black faces as its leadership. So if I'm starting from the perspective or the point of view, or where we have this purest black state that it takes care of, I've not lived in one yet, as yet. So I don't know. I think that we need to go back and we need to maybe configure or plan or structure a black state, because for me this is theoretical. You know, I am living in a place where the rubber meets the road. So if the state has failed me, I have to depend on myself to ensure my upkeep, my welfare. And for me, the road is in terms of capitalism. It's in terms of, well, some people may say commerce, capitalism. There is no distinction. I understand that there's distinctions. I understand there's distinctions, but I must do certain things to ensure that for my own personal welfare and benefit. Now, if I am providing a service, or if I am contributing a product that is beneficial for my community, and in turn they want to give me some kind of financial gain and profit for whatever service that I provide, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? I understand we believe in this whole equality thing, that we all should rise together and all men are created equal. But let me tell you something, you know, in the grand scheme of things, there are some men who are willing to do certain things just a little bit more than others. So if I am a man who is doing things just a little bit more than others, why wouldn't I be able to benefit and profit from the things that I'm willing to do where others are not? You know, I wish I could have a conversation with the brother, you know what I mean, a man to man with him, where we could have a real discussion, not a theoretical one, because I understand the concepts that he is trying to convey, and these things are very theoretical and high minded. I'm telling you, when a rubber meets the road, the story is told a little bit differently. It's told a little bit differently. And there are some men who are inclined to do certain things, where there are others who are not. There are some men who are willing to take risks, who are willing to put down their money, and who are willing to invest, whereas some men who are not. Why should they get just as much as me when I'm willing to do certain things where they are not? So I don't know. I just have I have disagreements with my socialist minded brothers, my liberal, and this is another thing, because he talks about liberalism in terms of from a social perspective and an economic perspective. These are two different things. I think that he is making very convoluted. A conservative, a neoliberal is really a neoliberal is really on a social aspect of things is conservative, but that conservative believes in the free market. Joe Biden is a person who is more conservative in terms of economics, because he believes that the state should take over and control, not the individual. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm these these heavy kind of political conversations. I really don't like to get into it on a Saturday like that. But I'll leave it. I'll leave it there. I'll leave it.
Let's welcome in. Thank you for that, Bonham. Let's welcome in Brother Bakari this week. Brother Bakari, how are you?
What's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm hanging in there.
Yeah, thanks for letting me speak. What's up, everybody on the panel, in the chat?
Peace.
I missed the video, but I heard y'all talking about socialism and all those isms. And look, socialism, capitalism. This is not true, right?
Wait, Bakari, real quick. The video basically is a conversation of how, like the problem says, we have to differentiate what is commerce. Africans, for example, always had commerce, but not necessarily capitalism. That there's a difference there. So you can speak to it from that standpoint.
Well, would there be a difference in commerce and capitalism? I won't be honest. I really wouldn't know. Commerce and capitalism kind of go together, but that don't necessarily make commerce. Commerce, when you're moving goods and everything, that don't necessarily make it capitalism. But if we go back, my point is there was always capitalism. Even when you say they just had commerce, even when he mentioned Mansa Musa having slaves, and he was trading certain things, in the barter system. In my mind, and people can say I'm wrong, and y'all can correct me if you think I'm wrong. In my mind, in a sense, that is capitalism. And if they want to say it wasn't capitalism, well, with him having slaves and him being filthy rich, so that would let you know, even in a socialist society, that it wasn't everybody don't have what they need, even in a socialist society. But since I didn't hear the video, I'm going to, because I can't speak much on the video because I didn't hear the video, so I'm going to stop there.
I appreciate that, Bakari. I had a follow-up question. It just slipped my mind what the follow-up question is. But does anyone want to add any last thoughts on this point?
Yes, I am. Trigger happy say I'm being unfair, and maybe I'm being unfair. But to lean it towards socialism. But when we talk about capitalism, when we talk about commerce, I am tired of it being compared to Tipple Tibbs. You know what I mean? How do I become a slave seller because I decide that with whatever skill that I have or I've mastered, whatever product that I find that is beneficial to my community or serve my community, in turn that I can get a profit for it, all of a sudden I'm Tipple Tibbs. I'm a person who sells slaves. Come on, brother. Y'all do the same thing to us when we say we capitalistically inclined or we commercially inclined. Y'all do the same. Y'all volley the same kinds of comments towards us, But that's just me. That's just me, man.
Yeah, and I also want to put out, because even when we talk about whether it's commerce or capitalism, because one of the things about capitalism in the sense, for instance, I have this idea, right? Let's say it this way. Okay, so you could use AI to make school age assignments type thing, right? Like, you could say, hey, ChatGPT, make this assignment for a 10-year-old, essay, a multiple choice essay on the Zulu Empire, and it will age appropriate multiple choice essay, right? Now you can create an interface such that you do the work to create an interface, you do the programming to create an interface such that children, like, you can sell a program to a school, let's say in Uganda, right? You could sell a program to a school in Uganda that essentially, pays you, to use that program to facilitate the education there in Uganda, right? And you use Chat GPT or whatever, right? And I'm just mostly giving that much detail because I think it's a good idea that people might be interested in. Either way, if I do that, if I do all the work, right? Yeah, I expect to get the money. And I don't know to what extent trigger happy means by commerce, right? But what I can say is that is that the same as Mansa Musa exchanging salt? No, it's not the same as Mansa Musa exchanging salt. It is. Sorry, somebody making noise?
Your mic is making a lot of rumbling noise. If you could.
Me?
Yeah, from you.
Oh, sorry. I think I was something fell off and I screwed it back on. Is it better now?
Much better. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that if I do that sort of work, or like, for instance, I write this book and I do that kind of work to sell it and market it and what have you, right? I don't particularly, like, for instance, I don't get the demonization of Jay-Z. You get what I'm saying? Jay-Z is a rapper. He creates art, he creates music, and then suddenly he's this hyper exploitative person, or another rich person. What's his name? LeBron James. LeBron James just shoots basketballs. He just shows up whenever somebody tells him to shoot a basketball, and he gets a bunch of money for it. Like, I don't see the demonization of these people. Like, who exactly are they exploiting? Like what exactly? Like, I don't get it. What's the problem with Jay-Z having $1 billion? What's the problem with, or even the more clear example of possibly quote unquote exploitation being Rihanna, where she has a sweatshop, I guess, for her laundry, not laundry, her fragrance brand, right? So she gets $1 billion because she's not paying these people at American rates. Okay, but why would she pay these people at American rates? And that's really like what I'm not getting about the criticism of the hyper rich, or like what Buana is saying. Why are we comparing these people? Why are we comparing anybody to Tipu Tip? Why are we comparing anybody to somebody who's literally attacking people and stealing them and sending them off to another country? Like, how is Jay-Z doing anything? Like, I don't like Jay-Z. I don't like his music. I don't like him as a person. But I'm not comparing him to, a slave raider. And that's really where it's kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Can I say something right quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I most definitely understand the demonization of Jay-Z. And when people say what they say about Jay-Z, I'm gonna say this, right? Then I got some Jay-Z, they was put it out, made like Jay-Z was part owner of the Brooklyn Nets. He bought the Brooklyn Nets, but he didn't buy them, of course. He was like 20% owner, something like that. Jay-Z was the beginning of the gentrification of Brooklyn, where they started building the stadium. Because as soon as they started out the Brooklyn Nets' first or second season, Jay-Z sold his shares. It wasn't even about him being owner of the team. It was about black people accepting that a black person owned part owner of the Brooklyn Nets, so they could get the okay for the beginning of that gentrification, that stadium, which is the beginning of the gentrification, with no pushback. That's my take. That's my take on Jay-Z. But I'll say this though: the same people that will call out Jay-Z and will call out see, I ain't gonna say Jay-Z. I'm gonna say LeBron James. But the same people that will call out LeBron James and mad because he's a billionaire, they spend $100, $200 on a pair of Nikes, but they ain't saying nothing about that white boy.
Thank you. See,
What?
and I agree with that, Brother Bakari. See, and I agree with that. And let me follow it up with this. Before I get to Jay-Z, there's a long line of products that Black people support, like Ray Kroc. I never hear Ray Kroc voice mouth in the mouths of Black people. And McDonald's everywhere in the ghetto, everywhere, and he employs people. But the food that he is selling to the people is causing high blood pressure, hypertension, diabetes, all kind of shit. So it's a long line of so-called capitalist people who selling their products within our community and services before I ever get to a JC that Black people should have in their mouths. And you as a Gaviite should know that too, and I know that too. Before I ever could talk to about Jay-Z, I need to talk about the motherfucker who making menthol. Sorry for cursing. Who making menthol cigarettes? Because they killing more Black people than anybody in our own community. What are we talking about? We ain't mentioned no Arabs who selling things within our community every day. It's a long line of people before I ever get to talk and put Jay-Z in my mouth. That's all I'm saying.
Now let me finish, right? But I agree. What I was going to say is we always figure out a way to make Black people be the problem, unless you're a certain kind of Black person. You can be one of these street dudes shooting and robbing and doing all that, and we got a whole bunch of excuses. But we always look to make Black people be the problem. And I believe that people who run to socialism feel that they can't do anything within this system. So instead of working with Black people and using this system to build the things that you need, we run away from it and say, I would rather fight all the Black people who out here actually trying to do something for Black people and who want to use this system to create something good for Black people. Because the socialism in this country won't ever exist. And I'm going to tell you why it won't exist. The United States got a bomb Bixby project building in New York. And these people running around talking about socialists don't have a damn thing. That's why. What they're doing is getting on people's nerves. I'm going to say me, for one. Because every time you're talking about doing something, let's mention socialism. We can't even mention having a cooperative-owned, community-owned business. Well, that's close to socialism. We do need to work as a group. But socialism, that socialist group, that's not for me, right? Even though there's aspects of socialism that I understand, even in this system, you have aspects of socialism. And I understand sometimes, yeah, but look what capitalism did to us. Yeah, we were the capital, and yeah, they got filthy rich off us. So if the capitalism was based off us, why when y'all scream socialism, why do y'all have to go get all the white people, all the Mexicans, all everybody? While everybody else used this system to build up their own community, build themselves up and create their own communities. I've already shown here in what they call the Mecca, Wakanda, Atlanta. I showed them much. You can just go see how these Mexicans came, and you can see people, they ain't out here arguing and complaining, talking about we need socialism. They working within the system, and you starting to see them build up their own communities and living amongst themselves. But we choose not to, because we have to find a way to say that I'm going to go back to, it's going to be Jay-Z, it's going to be LeBron James, it's going to be whatever Black you can name, it's going to be the problem. But I'm going to say, we look in the mirror, we have to start doing what we're supposed to do to build for our people. On that, I hear the mic.
Yeah, I think that's one of the issues too. So,
Yeah, keep it
so
brief for me.
all right, let's do it quickly. So basically, the capitalism, communism, or capitalism socialism dichotomy is really about industrial economies. Industrial economies, so factories. Who owns the means of production? Is it going to be individuals or is it going to be the state? And so, realistically, a lot of black economies are not even industrial. So it's kind of like a moot point. But the idea is that if you were to approach industrialism, would you approach it from the position of the state owning the means of production, the factories, or would you approach it from the position of the state owning, of individuals owning it? So in a sense, you know, like it really comes down to who owns, like, let's say the mango factory. And right now it's like, even when I talk about a restaurant, that's not necessarily a factory. I'll just say that.
All right, good discussion there, guys. Let's go to Shoot the Breeze topic number 2 for time's sake. Shoot the Breeze